Welcome to Office Hours. Our Hoover Institution Fellow in this episode is Victor Davis Hanson, a scholar in classics and military history. His latest book is The Second World Wars.
NATO was created according to its founder, its first Supreme Commander, Lord Ismay of Britain, to keep Germany down, the United States in, and Russia out. Now, we sometimes think that the geopolitical landscape has changed such that that's now ossified or archaic concept. In fact, it was based on ideas that transcend time and space. Germany was always the most dynamic country since its reunification in 1870-71, and it always required vigilance. And today, even though it is a democratic ally of the United States, it has problems on immigration with Eastern Europe, it has problems on finance with Southern Europe, it has problems with Great Britain on Brexit. So there is still a worry about German dynamism. The same holds true of Russia, whether it's under Soviet or Tsarist or Putin auspices. It's a big country, it's right next to Europe, and it always has ambitions that sometimes are not compatible with Western sentiments. In the United States, as we know from the 20th century, when it does not intervene or protect or ally itself with Europe, then Europe has separate agendas and they cut deals with particular autocrats of the moment. So although the world has changed since the founding of NATO, the original rationale is brilliant because it reflected ageless geography and human nature. People in the world, but especially in the United States, often ask, why is America still engaged with NATO? Why does it have to be NATO's leader, given that the economy and the population of the entire European Union is greater than America? And the answer simply is that the European Union is not a union, it's a conglomeration of separate states, and that applies particularly to NATO. So whether NATO reacts to a threat in common depends on the spiritual, ethical, moral, and material strength of the United States. Once we remind the world that it's not World War I where we're going to come in late, but it's World War II, we're going to stay and win the war and then stay on, that determination then creates a sense of solidarity among NATO nations, and it tells our enemies that if you pick a fight with France, or you pick a fight with Greece, or you pick a fight with Poland, you're really not picking a fight with those individual countries, but you're picking a fight with the power and the strength and the reputation of the United States. And that supplies a deterrent effect in Europe, and it's worked pretty well since the end of World War II. Should NATO expand its responsibilities to contemporary hotspots like North Korea, or should we intervene against global terrorism as an alliance? And the answer is very complicated, because originally, as again, our agenda was to keep Russia out, Germany down, and America in. What if that's already supposedly been met under the original NATO charter? In other words, do we take on added responsibilities that were not confined to the European continent, or we might not be able to execute efficiently? And we got to keep the rationale in mind that every time NATO takes on an additional obligation, the primary question is, can it win that war? Can it defeat that enemy? And to the degree that it can't, it not only loses reputation and then extraneous responsibilities, but it questions the very existence of the alliance in Europe itself. So people say, well, if NATO was not effective in Afghanistan, or it's not effective on the war on terror, then it might not be effective in protecting Eastern Europe, or it might not want to risk its reputation protecting Greece, or it can't adjudicate a struggle or a rivalry between Greece and Turkey. So each time NATO expands its mission beyond the original intent, it incurs a greater level of responsibility, but also danger. People often ask if NATO should expand its membership, and it in fact has been expanding radically so since the end of the Cold War, when we've incorporated most of the Warsaw Pact countries, and now we've included almost every country that is a member of the European Union with some exceptions. In theory, it seems fine. The more countries you have on the same team, the smaller the opposition is, or maybe the opposition itself can be co-opted. But again, the problem is that NATO exists as an effective alliance on one premise, that an attack on one NATO member means an attack on all the NATO members. So the more agendas you bring in with the additional memberships, the more somebody in a country says, do I really want to risk my life in a cafe in Florence for a Baltic state? Or if I'm in Great Britain, do I really want to go across the ocean and protect somebody in Bulgaria? So the more diverse the membership, the more different languages, the more different types of constitutions, the more different alliances that each individual state has with other countries, the complexity increases. And with greater complexity, unfortunately, there's a greater likelihood that the alliance will not unite for a common purpose against a perceived threat toward one country. And when that happens, it just takes one instance. When Article 5 is invoked and it's not enforced or it's not carried out successfully, then the alliance will dissolve, as it should, because it no longer has the mission that it was entrusted with. The question always arises, should the United States continue to contribute to NATO in the sense that it carries the majority of expenses, military hardware, and manpower, when again, the area in which NATO operates, essentially the same as the European Union, has a greater GDP and population does the United States. We spend between 3 and 4% usually, or sometimes higher, of our GDP on military affairs and responsibilities. Most NATO countries, with 3 or 4 exceptions, do not. They spend between 1 and 2, or more likely less than 1%, and yet they expect defensive coverage from the United States. So the question is not just, is it a good bang for our buck, but rather, what is the holistic political and military relationship between NATO members and the United States? History sort of suggests to us that as long as we're on the same page politically, Americans are willing to sacrifice and carry the greater burden given what we had to endure in World War I and World War II and during the Cold War. However, if individual NATO countries start to, if I could use the vernacular, ankle bite against the United States, or triangulate, or suggest that maybe they're being dragged reluctantly along into a foreign intervention, or adopt a mantra that the United States causes many of the world's problems, then almost immediately the old bugbear reappears. Do we really want to pay for these people who are attacking us? So the question of what is a proper American financial commitment to NATO is deeply embedded with what is the attitude of the NATO countries in any given era toward the United States.